There was a place in America that worshipped Hitler. But why is it now being erased from history? This is the tragic story of America's very own Nazi town. The year was 1933, and people all around the world were fed up with how things were going. The Great Depression had been raging for several years, and there didn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel. People needed a hero, someone to come along and set things right. And who better than Adolf Hitler? At least that's what many Americans thought. In 1933, Hitler came into power, and many Americans saw him as a strong leader who could turn the German economy around. He promised his followers that he would bring back jobs, end poverty, and make Germany great again. Of course, Hitler also had some other ideas, including killing every Jew in the country and starting a war with Russia. But most Americans didn't know about those plans, or they simply didn't care. All they saw was a charismatic leader with a plan to fix the economy. One of Hitler's biggest fans was a man named William Dudley Pelley. In fact, Pelley loved Hitler so much that he decided to create his own town where everyone worshipped the Nazi leader. The town would be called Wauwaukeling and located in the hills of western North Carolina. Before we get into what happened next, we want to say thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Now let's go back to the video. The first thing that anyone noticed when they came to Wauwaukeling was the sign that read "Keep Out." It wasn't your typical Keep Out sign. It featured a large swastika, an emblem that's now synonymous with hate groups like the KKK and neo-Nazis. The sign was basically telling everyone that this was a whites-only community. But it wasn't just the sign that made Wauwaukeling different from other towns. It was also the people who lived there. Most of the residents were members of the Silver Shirts, a group founded by Pelley in 1933. The Silver Shirts were basically an American version of the Nazi Party. They wore similar uniforms and followed a similar ideology. They were also anti-Semitic and racist. For the Silver Shirts, the creation of Wauwaukeling was part of a larger plan to take over the United States. They believed that the country was being run by Jews and other minorities, and that they needed to be kicked out if the country was to survive. Once they took over, they would establish a fascist government and make America great again. Or at least that was their plan. In reality, the takeover never happened. Wauwaukeling was just a small town, and the Silver Shirts were a relatively small group. But that didn't stop them from trying. The first thing they did was build a replica of the Berlin Olympic Stadium. They used this stadium to hold rallies where they would promote their hateful message and recruit new members. They also built a large clubhouse where they would meet and plot their takeover of the country. And, of course, they had to have a statue of Hitler. It was placed in the center of town, and everyone was forced to salute it every morning. As you can imagine, life in Wakaka was pretty scary for anyone who wasn't a white Christian. The Silver Shirts ruled the town with an iron fist, and they weren't afraid to use violence to keep it under control. There were rumors that they even had their own private police force, and that they would beat up anyone who didn't follow their rules. One of the worst things about Wakaka was the constant fear of what might happen next. The Silver Shirts were always talking about taking over the country, and it seemed like they were getting closer and closer to making it happen. Many residents of Wakaka believed that a revolution was imminent, and they began to stock up on supplies. In the end, the revolution never happened. And in 1941, Pelley was arrested for planning to overthrow the U.S. government. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but he was later released, and he spent his remaining days running a dude ranch in Colorado. As for Wauwaukeling, it's pretty much gone. The town was abandoned in the 1950s, and today only a few buildings remain. So why is this town being erased from history? Well, there are a few reasons. First off, it's just too embarrassing. No one wants to remember that there was ever a place like Wauwaukeling in America. The whole idea of a town full of Nazis is just too crazy. Secondly, many of the people who lived in Wauwaukeling were involved in some pretty terrible stuff. There are pictures of them wearing Nazi uniforms and saluting Hitler. If these pictures were to surface, it could ruin the reputation of the town. Finally, most of the people who lived in Wallwalkilling are now dead, and those who are still alive don't want to be reminded of their time in the town. It's a painful part of their past, and they just want to move on. Despite all of this, there are still a few people who remember Wallwalkilling. One of them is a man named Joe McAnuff. McAnuff grew up in a nearby town, and he remembers when the Silver Shirts came to Wallwalkilling. He said that they were like a bad dream. You couldn't escape them. They were everywhere. Eventually, McAnuff and his family left Wallwalkilling, and he hasn't been back since. Another person who remembers Wallwalkilling is a historian named Michael Newton. Newton has written several books about the town and its residents. He says that the people who lived there were some of the worst racists in America. They were truly hateful people who wanted to do terrible things. So, what's the lesson here? What can we learn from the story of Wallwalkilling? Perhaps the most important lesson is to be careful of charismatic leaders. People like Hitler and Pele are often very charming and convincing. They know how to manipulate people and get them to do things they wouldn't normally do. That's why it's important to be aware of their tactics and not let yourself be fooled. We also need to be careful of groups that promote hatred and bigotry. Groups like the Silver Shirts prey on people's fears and prejudices. They offer a scapegoat for people to blame their problems on, and that's why it's important to be tolerant and accepting of others. Finally, we need to remember the lessons of the past. The people who lived in Wallwalkilling were some of the worst racists in America. They promoted violence and hatred, and they tried to overthrow the U.S. government. It's important that we remember what they did so that it never happens again. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching.